Right, let's crack on. Let's go further down the right-wing terror hole.
Shall we move on then to Glengarry, Glen Ross?
We should.
Grace. Can I get another more quoted film that people haven't actually seen? Grace? There's a big step up in the writing in Glengarry Glen Ross compared to House of Games, and a quantum leap in terms of the quality of the cast. And my, what a cast. And that's just as well, as both top quality performances and a top quality screenplay are necessary to make the characters at the heart of this film, directed by James Foley from a screenplay by Mamet, based on his own stage play, in any way relatable or sympathetic. If you're not familiar with Glengarry Glen Ross, you should know that the story is about cold collars. Yes, quite. I'll give you a second or two to finish muttering imprecations beneath your breath. And I've called them lying cold collars, but that would be somewhat tautological.
I was going to say, yeah, the tautology there. Cut it out. This is Mamet, mate. We don't have extraneous words.
This group of reprobates work in an office in New York City. The play was set in Chicago, though I doubt either location is key to the action, where they try, by hook or by crook, to foist the sale of less than prime real estate on unwilling potential buyers, foolish enough to have filled out an unrelated form at some point in the past. The group consists of Al Pacino's sharp-talking Ricky Roma. Using Scott's patented Scarface performance metric, Pacino here rates about 0.1 of a Scarface, or normal person. Ed Harris's all-mouth and no-trousers Dave Moss, Jack Lemmon's washed-up Sheldon the Machine Levine, and Alan Arkin as... Alan Arkin? Rounding things out are Kevin Spacey's mediocre but malicious office manager, John Williamson. Jonathan Pryce is a browbeaten and hapless Mark. And in a role specifically written both for the film adaptation and for him, Alec Baldwin is the corporate motivator Blake, sent from downtown by Mitch and Murray to, in simple terms, put the fear up them in order to increase sales. Blake's speech to the workforce, along with comically unsubtle brass balls prop, is the motivator for the action, as well as the source of a great many of the quotations that have slipped into popular culture among those who haven't even seen the film, as he informs them that they're all fired, but they have a week's opportunity to regain their jobs, after which the top two salesmen will be retained. Sales leads are then portioned out to the group, with the tantalising prospect of the new Glengarry leads for development in Florida and the reward for those who can close the sale. I feel I must point out that that absolutely none of this has anything to do with hats. which confused a much younger me for a long time, as a Glengarry in these parts is a hat what soldiers wear, and indeed was being worn by myself in the Army Cadets the same year this film was released. I assumed for some time before seeing this that there was a connection. There was not.
Rest assured.
The film's nighttime set first half concludes with the attempts of the salesmen to get sales on the board, and Dave Moss's discussion with Arkin's George of the idea of breaking into the office and stealing the Glengarry leads. The second portion begins, in the cold light of day, represented by a cool, unsaturated palette that contrasts with the warm, rich palette of the first half, with a burglary having taken place at the office, and the police in attendance wishing to question all of the salesmen. Someone has something to hide. Spending any length of time with these shysters and hucksters ought to be unpleasant and leaving you wanting to give your soul a good shower, but the characters, dialogue and interplay are all captivating and rewarding. Unlike some of the other films we're covering in this episode, the dialogue isn't simply there for the sake of, or the sound of, the dialogue, with no substance beneath it. Though the... am I portraying how I feel about David Mamet, Craig?
You might be.
Though the actors are clearly thoroughly enjoying delivering it, and it is great, but fleshes out character and motivation in a way that makes these people seem real. That doesn't work without great acting, though, and Glengarry Glen Ross is full of that, though it's Jack Lemmon that takes home the plaudits. Shelley's smooth, sickly sweet telephone voice is absolutely hateful, as is his absolute utter lying bastard sales pitch. Not that that sets him apart. Yet it's impossible not to feel sympathy for the past his prime salesman, even without the information that he's desperately trying to find money to pay for his daughter's medical care. And that's thanks to Lemon's performance. It's so distinctive it even spawned a recurring character in The Simpsons, old Gil Gunderson. Oh boy, your whole life you work and you slave and scrimp and you steal just enough to get a sweet, sweet lick of that shiny brass ring. Where's Gil's lick? Doesn't old Gil get a lick? Less successful is James Foley's direction, as it's really hard to see much evidence of it. Glengarry Glen Ross is hardly alone in his selection of films in feeling stagey, but despite weather and establishing shots of New York City, the action feels apart from the world, small and self-contained, and leaves the feeling of this being a recorded play rather than cinema. However, it's a play I'd want to see, so yay, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, being a bit stagey is something you'd say about pretty much every Mamet film, apart from the last couple, maybe. But I don't mind that in the slightest. I understand that as being kind of the artifact of where it came from. A hell of a lot of competition, as I understand, to actually get a hold of these roles, with people taking the usual pay cuts to get into it, and I can entirely understand why. I don't think I mentioned this in my top 10 films back at the start of this endeavour, but yeah, this would have been a very high contender for being on it. I absolutely love Glengarry Glen Ross.
Likewise.
It is just an acting powerhouse of film, and the dialogue is, of course, a great part of that. And I think it is that kind of almost staccato delivery of things, people talking to each other, all that kind of stuff works really, really well in this context, particularly with all these characters, all of whom feel just absolutely great in a sort of slightly greasy, stickly way, but they all feel very real. I mean, even the guys that are the least of them in terms of kind of being an out there character, like Kevin Spacey, somehow gets his moment in the sun at the end of it as well, and that feels entirely believable and entirely sensible in that moment. And yeah, it's just a really great powerhouse acting performance from all in the cast. I believe it was you, Drew, that put 12 Angry Men forward for the kind of his sort of best of your favourite films, and this kind of falls into that kind of same category for me.
There are similarities, certainly.
Yes, it's obviously very different, and not just because of Jack Lemmon's performance on it, but yes, it has that kind of stagey performance to it, but I don't mind it in this instance. It would have been nice to have a bit more of the trappings of being a film, but to be honest, they would have been just a cherry on a cake, and I'm not sure it would have been easy to kind of particularly integrate that when you are just talking about two characters talking to each other. Does it really matter how cinematic it looks? I'm not sure. But yeah, what I'm trying to say is I love this film. It's great.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I was given that as a criticism per se. It's more of an observation because I enjoy the film so much and I enjoy the interaction and the dialogue. It's just it didn't feel like a film.
Which is entirely fair, and it could be said about a lot of his films. Yeah,
I've got a more stagey film to talk about tonight.
Yes, we know you do.
No, isn't Glengarry is essentially just the gold standard for this type of thing, isn't it? And I think it's quantifiably the best film that Mamet has had involvement in, arguably by some margin. The performances are beyond reproach, probably. I think it's fair to say. And there's something about the movie adaptation. I've seen a couple of stage adaptations of Glengarry, stage performances rather of Glengarry, and they're never less than entertaining and engaging. But there really is something about this movie, and I do think it's the cast where everybody's just essentially operating at the peak of their game, and it's the best Mamet's screen work. It's not my favourite, but there is, I think, no cogent argument to be made for it being anything other than the best, and probably by a reasonable margin. So yeah, I think everybody said enough already. I wouldn't have anything else to add to it because it is, it's not the most plot dense film. I'm not going to spend all night talking about the cinematography or anything. It is what it is. It's a screen adaptation of a stage work, but it's about as good as that kind of thing is going to get.
Yeah. Yes. It's definitely just a critical mass of the talent involved in it. You could very easily imagine this with less talented cast, and it would be awful. Perhaps even, as we discussed in the last film, if this had been directed by Mamet himself and given a different perspective and not given some actors a bit of a way to express themselves, because I'm pretty sure that how Mamet wrote this film is not quite the way that Al Pacino decided to deliver a lot of it. And I think it is all the better for that, because Al Pacino when he wants to, can act quite well. There's a hot cake for you. So yeah, it all just kind of comes together into just this lovely blend. I think you're right about the director, whose name I've just forgotten there. But
James Foley.
James Foley.
James Foley, I think, does not have a lot of leeway other than to just turn up and point the cameras in the right direction.
Yeah.
And to tell his actors to try and act this. And maybe he doesn't quite get to kind of unleash himself upon that, but again, it's all for the best. This is mainly an actor's film. That's why so many actors are clamouring to get into it. That's why it works so well.
You can tell he's not been there to micromanage, which syllable to put emphasis on in every single sentence,
Yeah, but I think maybe that's the good thing, because I'm aware that I did say, like, I kind of feel that the director's basically MIA in this film, that it feels like there's no stamp. But if you think of him more like a stage manager or something like that, or a producer rather than a director, and that he's just there to make sure these actors perform the roles.
Yeah.
Whereas, given my experience with all the rest of this stuff, had he been Mamet behind the camera, it's like, would it have been as good? I think maybe not.
Probably not.
I mean, particularly, if a director's job is not so much to put a stamp on a work as to just deliver a great film, then clearly he's done a very good job, because this is brilliant.
Really.
So,
whether with the micromanagement we're talking about, and would the result have been the same had it been Mamet?
I don't think it would. No.
Suggesting that the answer would be no.
No, and I think a lot of writer-directors probably have the same kind of need to control everything, because if you are writing and directing, in some cases producing your film, you're going to want a bit more input on it than someone who's kind of a bit more detached from the process and can give it other viewpoints, where, I think a lot of the films we were speaking about today would have benefited from someone else putting their oar in at some point, just to give a certain different perspective on things.
As someone who really enjoys Mamet speak, then I would suggest to you that the output of this movie is possibly the least Mamet, and that is almost what makes it the best of Mamet.
Yeah.
I'll think on that one for a while, Craig.
Yes. You do that.